Mhm.
So,
So should
still
we
can't.
stop now and start recording when we actually start, Laura? So we
Yeah.
can.
Really nice that you have like Zoom, and then you can do this kind of events, because otherwise you have to like to fly to a place so far away just for 1 hour or two. It's really it's quite difficult, actually, quite expensive as well.
Yes. So okay, it's 4:30 here in Brazil, 3:30 in US, and 8:30 in London. Is that right, Luis?
Yeah, 8:30. Yeah.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone to our SAR and medical residency in acupuncture UFSC joint co-hosted webinar. This is the first time we're doing a co-hosted event with SAR and our university. I'm Ari Moore. I'm a board member of the Society for Acupuncture Research. And it's really nice to have you all here today. I'm talking here from the sunny Florianopolis. And today we have a very special guest that will talk about the history of traditional Chinese medicine. And as the participants are joining the webinar, I'd like to say a couple words regarding our SAR International Research Conference. So as many of you know, SAR for a long time promotes acupuncture research, and we have this special research conference. So the next conference will be in June. And we prepare, I think this is the largest SAR conference we've ever prepared. So because of the connectivity now, like it will be an all virtual conference, we'll invited participants from all around the world. And we prepare a very special event. So I'd like to invite you all to, I put the link of the conference in the chat box, and we'll have organized some live interactions with the top acupuncture researchers from all around the world. We are promoting some network sessions with special interest groups. We are surprised to receive 98 scientific posters that will have like the latest cutting edge acupuncture research findings presented in the conference in a very interactive way. We have workshops, discussions about education, practice, implementation. And it's nice that we will have all this conference, it will be recorded. So if you want to watch it later as well. So I'll invite you all to join us for our SAR conference next month. So before we start, let me check some housekeeping issues. So I'll ask you if you have any questions to Luis. I'll ask you to put everything on the chat, because we have like the questions in the chat box. So put everything in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we will address the questions to Luis. So, and I was talking, we're chatting a little bit here before we started this event. I knew Luis, and when he was a student here at the Federal University of Santa Catarina. Luis, he did his bachelor degree in history here. Is that right, Luis?
Yeah, history.
Bachelor degree in the Federal University of Santa Catarina. I remember to finish the history course here, you have to present a dissertation, and he was very interested in Chinese medicine. He was also talking to my mentor, Professor Li Shimin, who is also here at this event today. So he was very interested in that topic. So he did his master's degrees in Chinese history at Fudan University in China. And right now he's currently he's doing his PhD in history at University College of London. And his research is funded by the Wellcome Trust. So Luis, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to do this joint webinar. I know you came here from the university that we are here, so we're very proud that like a student from our university is doing such a great and interesting research. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ari. I'm just going to share my screen now. Yeah. And computer sound. Yeah, so again, thank you very much everyone for coming, especially Ari, who invited me, also my supervisor, my former supervisor, Li Ximin, the Society for Acupuncture Research for holding the event. And again, I should thank the Wellcome Trust for supporting my research. Just a technical issue, it seems that I'm not looking at you just because I'm using two screens, and then the big screen just in front of me and the small screen with the laptop is just like on my side. But I'm looking at you, it's just because I prefer to use like the big screen, so you don't have to worry, just a technical issue. Okay, so I'm going to start with this presentation with a question. So is there Chinese medicine beyond TCM? And just to warm things up, I'd like to show you 5 images. And I'd like you to think about if any of these images represent what you think Chinese medicine is. So here you have a doctor or a man, and he's feeling the pulse. This one is a woman, and she's actually looking at the incense, but she's being possessed. So she's doing a ritual to be possessed by a god. This one is the statue of a god of longevity, one of the Chinese gods of longevity. It's quite a famous one. This is a man, the man on the left, he can read faces. So he's a face reader, what you call the physiognomist. And then finally, this one perhaps a little bit more familiar with us. This is he's giving a prescription or something. And so if you like to answer this question, you don't have to answer it right now, but later, like when you have the debate, I'd be very glad if you could tell me if any of these images represented what you thought Chinese medicine was. So this is the outline of today's presentation. So I'm going to talk about the definition, so what I mean by Chinese folk medicine, the motivation, not only why I'm interested in the subject, but also why does the subject matter? And then I'm going to talk about 6 main themes in Chinese folk medicine through everyday objects, and then finally have the final remarks. So the definitions. You can define Chinese folk medicine in many, many different ways, but here, for the sake of argument, I'll try to define it in contrast to traditional Chinese medicine, because this is a field that all of us are more familiar with. So I think that my definition, or I try to understand my definition as a kind of ongoing, or as illustrating this ongoing contention between unification and fragmentation in Chinese history. So, for example, in politics, as you can see here in this map, on the one hand, we have this ideal of a centralized state ruled by an emperor or by a single party, versus the reality that actually this state is composed of a bunch of villages, that its boundaries have always been changing, and that its population is constituted of many different peoples and cultures, many of whom don't even consider themselves Chinese in the first place. For example, people in Inner Mongolia, in Tibet, in Xinjiang, but even the Han people, for example, in Taiwan and Hong Kong. We can also see this in religion. So on the one hand, you have the 3 or the 5 religions recognized by the Chinese state versus a multitude of folk traditions practiced by local communities and the Chinese population at large. Many of these folk traditions, they don't even have a proper name in historical writings, and they're simply despised as heterodoxy or as superstition. And I believe that you can also apply this framework of unification and fragmentation to medicine. So the table here is rather simplistic and it's not exhaustive, but I think it does contain a few key elements that can help us approach folk medicine. And if you're interested in the subject in a more academic sense, there are quite a few works out there on this, and you can also visit my website. There are some things on this on my website. So on the one hand, you have TCM, this state-sponsored discipline which pursues scientific legitimacy through the establishment of standardized theories and methods like the laboratory experiments, but versus a profusion of rather diffused and unnamed healthcare traditions used every day by the Chinese. So while TCM is a rather recent invention supported by the Chinese Communist state, folk medicine has for centuries been condemned as superstition, as it tends not to abide by the theories promoted in the medical classics like the Huangdi Neijing or in biomedicine. And in fact, many of those who claim that TCM is the real embodiment of Chinese medicine, they don't even consider what I'm going to talk today as medicine at all, but simply as folk religion or as superstition, something from the ancient past. So in my presentation today, I'll try to show how everyday objects can actually challenge this narrow view that there is no Chinese medicine beyond TCM. So why is that I'm so interested in folk medicine, and why does this subject matter if it matters at all? So as Ari has said, I did my BA in Brazil in history, and at that time I was already studying Chinese medical history, but at that time I thought Chinese medicine was basically the kinds of things that you could find in the medical classics like the Huangdi Neijing, Shenong Ben Caojing, and so forth, which is something amazing by itself. But then between 2014 and 2018, I went to China to study Chinese and also to do my MPhil at Fudan University in Shanghai. And at that time, I was very fortunate to come across a few Chinese folk healers, that is, people who had learned medicine not through textbooks in universities, but rather orally through master-disciple relationships. Some of them were Taoists, others were Buddhists, but none of them lived in temples or worked in public hospitals. That really blew my mind, as they showed me that even the medical classics like the Huangdi Neijing, they represented only a very tiny portion of what Chinese medicine really was. And that Chinese medicine was really a kind of living tradition, not something from the past. And here you can see, like, this image is one of the folk healers I met when I was in Shanghai. Actually, I was kind of his student when I was in Shanghai, and he's a specialist in the use of talismans for healing. So this is an altar for one of the kind of ancestors of his talismanic tradition. And I'm going to talk about talismans later. And this is here. Here, I'm not showing his face because what he's doing is actually legal in the Chinese law. He couldn't be practicing medicine, but you can see he has a huge collection of things. I'm going to show you some of these objects today. And then in 2019, I came to London to UCL to do my PhD with the Wellcome Trust. And then I also started working in the Wellcome collection at the Science Museum here in London. I was part of the inventory team at Blythe House, which is this very beautiful building here, which is actually the storage of the Science Museum, the Wellcome Trust, the British Museum, and the Victoria and Albert Museum. It's not open to the public. So most of the items that I have seen, they're not on display, unfortunately. But again, most of the objects that I saw when I was working there, I have never seen displayed in TCM museums in China. But from my experience living there and also working with these folk healers, I knew that these objects were still being used, and they were very relevant in medicine. So this is just the background, and now we are going to focus on the content. So I'm going to talk about, and this is another image. This is a collection of talismans, not only from China, from all over the world, but there are some from China, like the big sword, for example, in the middle, that is from China. And it's also used in medicine and religion. And that's the thing, because medicine and religion in China, they're really intertwined. You can't really separate them, at least in everyday life. So now I'm going to focus on I'm going to talk about 6 main themes in Chinese folk medicine through these everyday objects. Sorry. I'm going to adopt a kind of double approach. So I'm going to describe the object itself, but also I'm going to clarify what it represents, how it was used, and what kind of stories it tells us. And most of the objects from the Science Museum and the Wellcome Collection, even though they're not on display, you can find them on the website. Most of them, I think, you can find on their websites. Almost everything has been photographed. But there are also some personal items that are collected, and also photos and videos I took or recorded over the past few years in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, and Thailand. So let's start with the representations of the human body. I believe that most of us are when you talk about Chinese medicine or the body in Chinese medicine, probably this is the kind of image that comes to our mind. So this is what we usually call the acupuncture body, with all the channels and the acupoints. And this is actually not only for acupuncture, but also for moxibustion, for massage, and many other healing techniques. And this kind of representation of the human body is very common in TCM textbooks. And even if you go like to TCM hospitals in China, probably this is the kind of image that you're gonna see. And if you go to Google, actually, this is also the kind of body that you're gonna find. But actually in China, there are many more representations of the human body. And this, I'm going to talk about one of these representations. And this is what we usually call the alchemical body. So the image here comes from a Taoist text from the 16th century, and it represents inner alchemy, which means like this kind of inner transformations in the body for the individual to become an immortal. As you can see, like this image contains many elements, and if you're interested in this, actually quite a few people have published on this, and I can just send you the reference later. Perhaps you can just put on the website if you like. But today I'm just going to talk about a few of these elements. So here on the belly, for example, what you can see some kind of, first that's, you don't see, you're not seeing like the channels or the acupoints. What we are seeing here is like kind of animals inside the body. And these are actually not parasites. These are kind of spirits that are living in the organs. So you can see a kind of dragon, tiger, a human-like figure, and a kind of goat or horse, and a lot of names. And actually this represents all the spirits that are living in the body. It's almost the idea that your body does not belong to you, but belong to a whole range of spirits, and that your body is connected with everything else in the cosmos. And what you do with these spirits, with the good spirits, is that you harness their power to attain the immortal body. Here on the top, there are another category of spirits that we are a little bit more familiar with. These are the 7 Po, or the 7 earthly spirits, which are usually in contrast or together with the 3 Huan, or the 3 celestial spirits. And you can see the representations also vary a little bit. Some are more like human-like figure, or like kind of leg with a head. But these are all, again, spirits living in the body. And then finally, here you have the 3 Shishan, or the 3 corpses. And this is another category of spirits that actually should eliminate from the body, because they are really like preventing you to attain immortality. So these you should remove from the body. And now what I'm going to show you here, this is a kind of zooming in the organs and the spirits living in the organs. So this image and the next one are actually from another text. These are from the 18th century, also in the Wellcome collection. And this image is the heart. So these are the spirits living in the heart. So you have this human and this bird, but these are actually both spirits and not really human or bird or animals. These are all spirits living in the heart. And then this one, the spirits living in the lungs. So you can see it's not only 1 or 2, but there are really a whole range of spirits living there. So it's really the idea that your body is populated by all these beings. And these are just a few representations of the human body. If you're interested in these, you can find a lot of these in old texts, old medical texts, but especially Buddhist and Taoist texts. So now we are coming to the second theme, and this is the bell ring, what in Chinese you call Chenglin. And the bell ring is an item that was used by itinerant healers to draw the attention of the public. And I'm going to talk about itinerant healers shortly, but let's focus on the object first. So this is the bell ring. This is part of the Science Museum collection. Unfortunately, it's not on display. As you can see, it's made of iron, it's quite crude, and the interior is hollow and contains a small iron stone, which makes sound. And the next images, these two and the next two are actually, this I took in China in 2018. And this comes from a collection of over 200 bell rings that are kept by that folk healer that I showed you previously. So he's not only a folk healer, but he's also Taoist, and he's a collector, but he doesn't live in a temple. He's a kind of lay person, just like us. But he has a huge collection of these Chinese medical objects that I have never seen anywhere else, in public at least. And this collection of bell rings are from the 9th to the mid-20th century, so it's really impressive. And again, as you can see, like these bell rings, they vary quite a lot in shape. So some of them are quite crude and small, others are more like polished and even made of bronze. And these two are the two that I found the most impressive ones. The one on the left, you can see it's very elaborated and it contains some astrological symbols. And the one on the right is actually not a ring, it's almost a kind of bracelet. I remember it was very heavy. And you have the 8 trigrams. And here, just like a normal symbol, not a number bell, each of these ring bells, they have different sounds. And here, just a very short clip, just for you to have an idea of how it works. So what she's saying here is basically that this is used by itinerant healers. And so who were these itinerant healers? So itinerant healers are basically peddlers who would wander from one place to another offering their healing services. And they were a kind of contrast to what you usually call elite doctors or like Confucian doctors, who are like most of them came from like wealthy families, and they would be invited also to see the wealth customers. Sometimes they would have their own clinics or their own pharmacies, and most of their knowledge, the medical knowledge, would come from the medical classics like the Huan Di Nei Jing. On the other hand, these itinerant healers, they were considered a very low category of healers. They were illiterate, so most of their knowledge would come from oral transmission. And therefore, their views on the cause of disease would sometimes also vary a lot in comparison to the medical classics. And elite doctors would say that itinerant healers are just interested in making money, to make profit, and that their activities were really immoral. But of course, these are their own views. But the fact is that itinerant healers, they were everywhere in China, and they played a huge role in healthcare because they are the main actors involved in treating the poor. There are very few accounts about itinerant healers in historical writings, and those that exist are extremely negative. And a few years ago, I also published an article on itinerant healers. And if you're interested in this, you can just visit my website. You can download it for free. And so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about itinerant healers. But as I said, if there are so few written accounts, so how do you know that itinerant healers played such a significant role in healthcare? I think there are two ways of dealing with this question. One is this kind of extant objects in private collections, just as those that I showed you, like the bell rings or some other items like the bags. And another one are illustrations about the everyday life. Sorry. And the next two images that I'm going to show you are actually, they belong to a series of 36 paintings depicting the everyday life of people in Suzhou in the mid-18th century. So these, again, the ordinary activities. These are not about medicine. You can see some people are sewing, playing, carrying some basket with water and riding a boat. And then here in the middle, you can see an itinerant healer. Like in his right hand, he's holding like the bell. On his left shoulder, a blue bag full of medicine. And then in this image, again, what you can see is some children like playing on the background. Others are like working on the fields. And then here again, we can see another itinerant healer. And if you're interested in, again, if you're interested in the subject, I do suggest that when you take a look at these paintings about everyday life, try to pay attention to who are being depicted there, because the likelihood that they're going to find itinerant healers is very high. For example, I saw another painting in the British Library, and it's again about the everyday life, and I also found this itinerant healer with the bell. So the next object is on the next category of objects are door amulets. And door amulets, I can say that they're even more ordinary than bell rings, because usually the bell ring is associated with itinerant healers, while door amulets are really everywhere. The idea of a door amulet is that it's going to prevent evil influences to enter the home. So it's going to ward off any kind or drive away any kind of evil, like ghosts or demons who try to approach the home. And so it is really a very broader understanding of health, because it's not only about the individual, but it's about the whole family, the whole household. And the door amulets, they should be affixed atop the main entrance of one's home and be left there all the time. So these door amulets, again, they vary a lot in shape and colors, and what is there, like the paintings or the animals. And so those that I'm going to show here, they're quite similar. They're all from the Science Museum. Unfortunately, again, they're not on display. And I have seen many of these in China. This is everywhere in China. And I mean China, not only mainland China, but like Chinese communities. But I have never seen this displayed in TCM museums. So this is probably not even considered part of medicine. So those that I'm showing you here, they are all from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, even that I just show you now. They are carved in wood, usually peach wood, which is considered a very powerful substance against this kind of the evil. And sometimes the creature here is a lion, a tiger, a dragon, or any kind of celestial beast. And you know that these are very powerful amulets because of several elements. Some of them are the beasts who are being depicted. You can see like their eyes and mouths are like wide open. So very ready like to swallow anything that tries to approach the home. And also like on their forehead, you can see the forehead is marked by actually a character, and this character is one, which means king. So it means that this is the king of all the celestial creatures. And so the ghosts, when they try to approach the home, they will know they should just go away. Otherwise they're going to be they're going to be killed. For example, in this talisman on the left, this is called the swallower. You can see like his mouth is even like with the character Tuan, to swallow. So it means that any kind of evil things that are trying to approach or trying to sneak into like one's home are going to be swallowed by this creature. And the one on the middle is the slayer. And you can see like he holds a sword in his teeth and like to slay demons and this kind of beings. And on his forehead, just above actually his forehead, you have the 8 trigrams, which by itself is also a door amulet. And here are some photos I took in 2018 in China and in Hong Kong. You can see again, these door amulets are different shapes. This one on the left is particularly interesting. If you pay attention, like on the top, there is a small piece of mirror. And the mirror works by, it's said that ghosts and demons, they are very ugly. Their appearance is horrible. And so when they see themselves in the mirror, they're so terrified about their own appearance that they just run away. So you don't need any beast, like their own appearance are going to make them run away and then not enter the house. And this is another door amulet. This is some photo I took in Hong Kong. You can see some door amulets on the door, placed on the door, like the door gods, the Mengshan. And here on the top, you have another amulet. Now we are coming to one of my favorite topics in Chinese medicine, and that's really like what made me so interested in folk medicine, talismans. So talismans are a kind of secret, sacred writing used to invoke the power of the gods. And they are used for many things, like for protection, self-cultivation, meditation, inner alchemy, divination, astrology, and so forth. And in medicine, they're usually used for diagnosis and for treating illness. And just like plants and acupuncture, the variety of illnesses that talismans can heal are extremely broad. So talismans are this kind of Chinese, they're composed of Chinese characters and symbols written on paper with black ink or cinnabar, like this one is made of with cinnabar, which is a kind of very red mineral, reddish mineral. They are burned into ashes and then ingested with pure water or any kind of herbal decoction, as you can see like in this drawing. This is not being ingested, but being burned. And sometimes this talisman can also be written on plant's leaves or directly onto the affected area. This is some images from a 20th century popular manual of talismans. And as you can see, these talismans, they exist in a wide range of forms. And each talisman has a specific function, like for headache, for cold, red eyes, skin injuries, or epidemics. But the rationale behind them remains the same. It's like to use the talisman to invoke divine powers. And what I found so fascinating with talismans is that they became an official medical discipline in the 6th century CE, even before acupuncture. And they remained an official medical discipline at least until the 17th century for almost like over a millennia. But even after that, they continue to be widely used by folk and elite doctors. And although today usually associate talismans with Taoism or with folk medicine, for centuries they actually constituted a medical discipline recognized, supported, and used by the imperial court and imperial doctors alike. And again, if you're interested in talisman, I have also written on this, you can find on my website. And one of my latest articles is about the revival of talismanic healing in China during the first half of the 20th century, just so less than 100 years ago. Now we're coming to spirit writing. And this spirit writing is usually, like in Chinese, they call Fuji or Fuluan. And this is a category of methods for humans to communicate with the spiritual world by means of writing. So actually it's very similar to what in the West we know as automatic writing, which again is extremely common among spiritist groups in Latin America, especially in Brazil. And just like talismans, spirit writing can also be used for a wide variety of purposes. Like this image here is from the 19th century. And these girls, they're actually playing with spirit writing. So actually could use spirit writing like to compose poetry or to write books or to many other kinds of things, just as a kind of entertainment. And in medicine, there are also different ways, but usually like the supplicant, the sick, is going to ask the gods to help diagnose an illness or to provide a prescription, just like as a human doctor, but instead of asking a human doctor, they're going to ask the gods. So you can see that's something considered very powerful. And records about spirit writing, the earliest records are from the 12th century, but actually this idea that humans can communicate with the spirits by means of writing is already something present in China, like for example in the Shan oracle bones almost 4,000 years ago. So actually this kind of practice is age old, even though spirit writing has like only 1,000 years old, which in Chinese history is not that much. But let's talk about spirit writing through an object. So this is a diorama. So diorama is a kind of miniature. And this is representing a spirit writing seance. So this diorama actually belongs to a series, to a collection of 28 other dioramas depicting or representing the everyday life in Fujian province in the late 19th century. So this is part of the Science Museum collection, and unfortunately, this is not on display. I think this is really a shame because this collection is really amazing, so interesting. But let's go through this together so we can have a better view, a better understanding of how it works and how it is related to medicine. So here, first of all, you have this man, and he's kneeling down in front of the altar, and you can see he's holding some sticks of incense and looking down on the at the god. So it's actually, she's showing that he's very sincere, he has a pure heart, and it's really like worshiping or like invoking, showing that the god. So it's like making a question, begging the god for help. The god here in question is no one other than Li Zu, who is a Taoist god, but he has for quite a long time been associated with spirit writing, especially in medicine. If you go to Hong Kong, for example, you can find like these altars for Li Zu everywhere, and they have this with a spirit writing. They also do spirit writing. And then you have these two men that are standing up in front of the god, and they are holding something. And this thing that they are holding, this kind of T-shaped device, this is the G. And there are different explanations of how it works. So some people say, or some texts say, that actually one of these two men is going to be possessed by the spirit of Li Zu, and then the G is going to move, and then characters are going to appear on the sand. While others say that actually these men, they're just holding the G, but the device, the G itself is going to be possessed. But regardless of how you understand this, the idea that Li Zu is going to possess something, and then characters are going to be spelled out on this sandbox. And again, they're using this device, but actually you don't have to use the device. You can use many other different things, like the brush, for example. Or even like the sand with not anything else, with nothing else. This man here, he's actually holding a piece of yellow paper, and this yellow paper is actually a talisman. It's very similar to this one. This is not the same. This is from my collection, but it's a talisman just like this one. And what he's doing is to invoke the god. So he's burning the talisman to invoke Li Zu to descend onto the altar. And then finally, you have this man here in black, and if you pay attention, he's looking directly at the sandbox. And what he's doing, he's actually writing down all the characters that appear on the sandbox. And then he's going to write a message, and this message that comes from Li Zu is going to be given to the man, to the supplicant, to the sick, and then he'll know the answer to his question. This is just a short clip for you to see how it works in practice. This is from Malaysia from 2017. There's something I should emphasize is that spirit writing is everywhere among Chinese communities. It's especially common in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in Singapore, in Thailand. When I went to Thailand a few years ago, I also found a spirit writing altar, and these are usually by the Chinese. Malaysia as well. A friend of mine is doing a research on these spirit writing altars in Malaysia, and in China, in mainland China, it's quite interesting because it's something that's not public. It has been prohibited for quite a few decades, actually. And so if you go to a temple in China, Taoist or Buddhist temple, and ask people around, oh, so you know about Fuji, you know about spirit writing? Of course, no one's going to say that they do that. So this is a kind of very secret practice. Like I came across this when I was in China, like in Shanghai, just because not in a temple, but like in people's homes. So this is something that even in Shanghai, which is the most cosmopolitan city in China, you can find that. And this image here I found particularly interesting. This is from Taiwan in 2018. The man in white, he's being possessed by a god, and you can see like with his right hand, he's holding the G, and in the left hand, with his left hand, he's taking the pose. So he's serving as a kind of the intermediary between the woman and the god. And the link between the woman and the god is actually the pose. So that's quite interesting because usually associate the pose like feeling the qi or blood in the body, but another use that it's very pervasive in Chinese society it has been pervasive actually for a very, very long time, is to use the pose for fortune telling, so to predict things in the future. And now we're coming to the last theme, which are temple processions. And there are many different names in Chinese for temple processions. These are actually very similar to what in Christianity we know as pilgrimage, or this kind of festival. So these are like community-based festivals for a god, a local god usually. And they're not always related to medicine, but that's the thing, because medicine is really everywhere. So it's very difficult to say that it's just religious or just like medical. It's really everywhere, and you're going to see this like in the next images. So this is, for example, this is excerpt, a quotation from a local gazetteer of Wuchang in Shandong province in northern China from the mid-18th century. So it says that the 5th day of the 5th month marks the birth of the city god. Locals collect money for a procession and noise buzzes across the streets. This ritual is called carrying incense, and it's used to expel demons who cause plague. So this is for epidemics. The images I'm going to show you here, they are all for a specific god. This is the god of epidemics, but Wanshan. But actually, you can do this kind of rituals. They exist for any kind of god you can imagine. The main idea, as I said, these are community-based, and the main idea is that you're going to appease the god. You're going to worship the god, to appease the god. So that he's going to help you exorcise evil spirits who are considered the root cause of epidemics and many other maladies. But here we're talking basically about epidemics. So this drawing that I'm showing you here, this comes from an illustrated magazine published in Shanghai in the 1890s. And this is a temple procession for the god of epidemics. And as you can see, it contains a lot of elements. It's very lively. And so let's go through the image together. So first of all, here in the entrance, you have the god. So this is a statue of the god, and it's being carried like in a chair by a lot of people. You can see that he's very powerful, not just because his appearance, but also because his implement. So like on the top, above his head, you have this parasol, which shows authority. And he's being carried by a lot of people. So the idea is that they are going to carry him out of the temple, then around the village or the city, and then it's going back to the temple. And you can see many other implements, some kind of banners, you can see fans, you can see men and women, old and children, everyone together. So this is the god. These are two other images of the god. The one on the left is on the Welcome collection again. And the one on the right, which is very similar to the drawing, this is a statue that you can find on Taobao. You can buy it if you like. Then just in front of the god, you can see, again, a lot of people. And these people, if you pay attention, they are dressed in very specific customs, like very similar if you have watched like Chinese traditional opera. And the opera itself, even today, is quite, it's like in a theater, very specific place. Actually, for centuries, it has been associated with, like intertwined really with religion, with popular religion especially. And you can see some women, you can see some flags. These people, they're also holding some weapons that is also to drive away any kind of evil. And they're also playing instruments, and the instruments are very metallic, very strident instruments, because it's also said that these evil spirits, they are very afraid of these kind of sounds. And you can see that this is something very noisy. If you pay attention, like these two children, like here, they're actually covering their ears because they probably can't stand all the noise. And again, you also have some people like burning incense and throwing some firecrackers. Then just in front of the temple, you see a theater. Some people, again, playing instruments and doing performances. Others are like holding some flags saying to avert calamity and to expel epidemics. And there are a lot of women also there. So again, it's really something that brings everyone together. And these kind of rituals, they really play with all the senses. This is really a kind of bodily experience because you have the smell of incense and the smoke. You also have the sweat and the touch, because like, as you can see, it's quite the opposite of what we are doing now with the social distancing. Here is the opposite of social distancing. Like everyone should come together. And you also have the sound, and you have the colors. I'm going to show you some colors. And again, here you have food. So if you have ever been in this kind of processions, you can see there are always people selling food. And these two guys here, they're selling probably baozi, like bread, a kind of the Chinese bread or fruits or something. And this image is from 2017. This I found particularly interesting. This is from Taiwan. You can see, if you pay attention to the customs and the makeup, they're very similar from the drawing. So it's really something still very alive in China. This is from Taiwan, of course, from Taipei, but like alive among these Chinese communities. And this one is, I found even more interesting. This is from 2020, from the beginning of the pandemic. This is from Taiwan. If you pay attention here, the one in the middle is no one less than the president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen. And this is, again, is a temple procession from a local god. And you can see everyone wearing the mask in the very correct way, which is something that here in London you wouldn't see. And I haven't seen for that's quite annoying sometimes. But anyway, everyone's wearing the mask and everything. And it seems that this really worked very well, as Taiwan has done an amazing job, a remarkable job with the pandemic. This photo is from 2019. I took this in Hong Kong. This again is a temple procession. This kind of rituals, they happen in Hong Kong every year. So it's something quite common, but this one in particular was very special because this takes place every 60 years. So I was very fortunate to be there during that time. And you can see all the colors, a lot of people, of course, but also the colors, like very shiny, like pink and yellow colors. This is in the same place, and this is just in front of the temple, just at the opposite side of the entrance. This is a theater. And again, it's very similar to the drawing that I just showed you. So they are doing these performances to appease the gods. But of course, there are also people watching, but the main audience are the gods. And this is another region in Hong Kong. This is also from 2019, but this is in Shau Kei Wan in Hong Kong Island, which is something that you probably wouldn't like expect to see in Hong Kong. But this is very common. And this is just in front of the temple. This is for the sea god Mazu. And again, you can see some people that are doing performances, like this guy here. I remember he's like in these wooden legs, and then he's just jumping around and doing all this kind of acrobacies to appease the goddess, and also burning incense and doing all kinds of things for the god. And these are some very short clips. The last thing that I'm going to show you, some very short clips about, I'd like to pay attention, especially to the noise. Probably it's very noisy, because that's really the idea. And this one is also there. These are all from the same temple procession. And this is a Taoist dance to expel evil spirits, especially plague demons. So, which means like these demons who bring epidemics. This is from 2019. So this is before the pandemic. And I think one of the things that these kind of rituals really do is really to challenge our own very view of like tradition and modernity, because we are talking about Hong Kong, which is one of the most developed places in the world. And people are still doing this, and they do this every year, even though like you can see doctors that are also there, like people who like educated people, everyone is coming together doing like in this kind of events. But so now we're coming to the end. And I started this presentation with a question. So is there Chinese medicine beyond TCM? And I hope that by now I have convinced you that yes, there is. But I think it's very important to remember that this thing that I call by this very generic name, folk medicine, it's not something from the ancient past. It's still out there, as I have showed you. but not in hospitals or in universities, but rather in temples, in private clinics, in people's homes, and also on the streets. And I think one of the main challenges here is really to pinpoint what folk medicine really is, because it's really intertwined with many other aspects of Chinese society, like religion, entertainment, diet, and self-cultivation. But I think if you don't pay attention to this very pervasive dimension of Chinese healthcare, our understanding of Chinese medicine will inevitably be rather narrow and incomplete. So thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions or any agreements or disagreements, I'd be very glad to discuss them with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Luis. I was watching your lecture, and I always remember here it's been like a long time that I haven't been in a museum and watching like art, and it was very interesting to look this now on Zoom, because you usually see this on live. Maybe this like the new normal for visiting museum. Is it open? Is it open? The British Museum did they open the?
So actually, they're opening now. I think they opened last week, but most of the images that I showed you here, you can find online. So everything's online. They have these virtual museums actually that is very nice. So you can find all these images. If any of you would like to visit the websites, I'm also very happy to share here with you.
Okay, we will share, if you can send me the links. We'll share the recording of this presentation to people that have registered to this presentation. So we'll send your website and the links that you think will be interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So, everything is free. So that's really nice. You can find all these objects for free.
Perfect. So I have a couple of questions here, Luis. So anyone that wants to come ask a question here in the chat box, or if you, I think would be interesting as well, if you want to come become a panelist and have a chat with Luis, maybe that would be interesting as well. So just let us know on the chat box while I ask a couple of questions to Luis. So, Luis, my perception, like, I'm a medical doctor and I studied like biomedicine, like, and then I studied Chinese, what I thought it was like really the Chinese medicine or traditional Chinese medicine. And I remember seeing your presentation, like, I think 3 or 4 years ago. And then I didn't realize that you would have something like this in China. My question is that how like doctors in China, like Chinese medical doctors, see this kind of practice there? Because here I feel here in the Western world, we will see like, oh, this is not part of medicine. This is like part of cultural thing. Like people like believe in gods, believe in things. It's part of their spirituality, but it's not like a medical treatment. So what is your interpretation of this?
Yeah, that's a really nice question. And because these kind of things, like we can see, you can find in Brazil, like the curandeiras, for example, that are very common in Brazil. And in China, you can't really talk from a theoretical perspective. Like in practice, I can say, like my own experience in China. So in TCM universities, you're not going to learn none of this. You're not going to learn any of this. This is not considered medicine. This is considered superstition. And usually they say in these histories of Chinese medicine that this is something from the ancient past, from like 2000 years ago, that no one today is doing this. And I also thought that when I just arrived in China, but then things start changing later. And I like TCM very much. I also studied for some time at the Shanghai University of TCM. I also use TCM. And so what I thought, like when I was at the Shanghai University of TCM, I came across a few other students. They're all like medical doctors. And what they told me is that one of their teachers were actually teaching them divination, but not during the class. During the class is prohibited. So they had a kind of society. And then after the class, he would go to a place, and then he's going teaching like the I Ching, like the book of changes, how to use the book of changes to diagnose illness. And so that's the kind of things you're not going, this is not visible. You have to be inside, and then you have to have a kind of way to talk, like talking to people. And when people realize that you're not like against this, that you have like, you have an more open mind, then they're going to start talking to you about this, all these things. And in Hong Kong, again, one of the doctors, actually the only doctor that I consulted in Hong Kong, he graduated at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, one of the most prestigious universities in East Asia and actually in the world, and which has a very important department of traditional Chinese medicine. But he also comes, so he graduated there. He has a PhD, even a PhD from there. But he also comes from a family of Chinese doctors. And then what he told me when he asked me, so why is that you're so interested in Chinese medicine? Then I started talking to him about talismans. And then he said, oh, you know, my grandpa also taught me some talismans for when you have something stuck in your throat, some kind of like bond or something. He taught me how you can use this talisman to throw things out. And then I thought that, wow, that's quite cool. But again, he said, I can teach you this, but that's not something that usually I'm going to tell people. So he has this appearance of doctor, like with the white clothes and everything, with the mask sometimes, but in the private lives, people do things very differently. So I think that's really the thing about China, what is in the like visible in society, and also what is like hidden or like more secret, which people are doing every day, but not like telling others that they're doing this. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yeah, and I feel like here, like here in Brazil, and I think in the US as well, or Europe, usually doctors don't ask about if their patients are doing other kinds of healing practices.
Yeah.
And one thing that I noticed is that none of the practice that you have shown us are like invasive or maybe have some interactions with like medical treatments. Like here in Brazil, we have a lot of medicinal plants that might like block or have some interference. So this could be really like help maybe to enhance the engagement with the medical treatment as well, if it's better known by doctors.
Yeah, and this is really like about the society. So like the whole society like coming together. And I think this is very important. So this is not just a kind of practice that you can like take from China and then just transplant it to somewhere else, like to Brazil, for example. I don't think that's, well, perhaps it's possible, but I can't see that like right now. But some of the practices are like they also use plants, but again, the way they use the plants are different. It's not some, you're not going to read like the TCM textbooks how to use the plants with the whole chemicals and everything. The way they use for different reasons, and they use different substances, so they can use like plants to expel again spirits that are living inside the body. And this is very interesting because the Chinese, they don't really see a kind of contradiction here. So people can go to see a biomedical doctor, what usually they call Western doctor, but they can also go to a TCM hospital, and then afterwards they can go to a temple and to ask a Taoist to give them a prescription, even better, to ask the gods to give them a prescription. They can use everything together, and there is no contradiction there. I think that is something very, that really amazed me that keeps amazing me actually every time when I see this in these Chinese communities. And so, yeah, but this again, like in China, for example, in mainland China, folk healing is prohibited.
Oh, really?
Yes, you can't do that because it is illegal. You're not, that's quite fun because you talk about like this traditional Chinese medicine, and these people who have been like doing medicine for millennia, they are considered like quacks or like charlatans or like superstitious people. And a few years ago, there was a kind of movement from the Chinese government to identify and give a kind of certificate to these folk healers. But for example, this guy that I met in Shanghai, who is very smart, and actually he also treats members of the Communist Party. But what he does is, oh, sorry, I just forgot what I said because I was just looking at the message. Yeah, I just forgot what I was saying. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Just go on.
Okay, so Luis, we have a question from Elena Valusi. Elena, if you want to come as a panelist to discuss with him, just right here in the box. I will read your question to Luis. So she wrote here, scholars have highlighted the connection between religion and healing in China for a very long time. The healing power of gods and related tools are like amulets, spirits, writing is well known. However, is it right that scholars and practitioners of Chinese medicine today do not want to highlight this connection? So where is your own research leading? Are you planning to contribute to the area of religion and healing, or position yourself as a researcher of Chinese medicine, attempting to widen the horizon of contemporary TCM?
Yeah,
very interesting question.
Yeah, that's really a very interesting question. Elena is totally right, because this connection between religion and medicine or healing in China, we know this for quite a long time. The Chinese know that, we know that, everyone knows that, but it's not something highlighted. And as Elena said, people even try to hide this, because this considers something very awkward to say that that religion is really intertwined with healthcare. But actually, my research is not about folk healing. This is just a kind of interest that I have, and it's part of my MPhil. So my master thesis was about talismans. So the use, but also the debate about the origins and the efficacy of talismans between the 16th and the late 19th centuries. And now my research is actually about the introduction of psychology in China in the early 20th century, but how the Chinese used psychology to explain these practices. So how the Chinese use psychology to explain, for example, meditation or self-cultivation or alchemy or talismans. And this is a quite interesting, I found very interesting story, how they use, for example, theories of hypnosis to explain why talismans work and why even temple processions work. So it's what I'm doing is a little bit different. Like the thing about the objects is more a kind of personal interest right now, and basically comes from my MPhil, but also by working at the Science Museum and the Wellcome Collection. I think I have answered. Yeah. And but I think like as a historian, like, yes, I'm a historian, but I'm also like in the midst of all this. I like all this kind of stuff, and I try to use everything I can when I'm sick. And so I think some way I try to widen this horizon of contemporary TCM. I think that's why I think this kind of event is so important, and that is something I would like to do more, like to show that there is something else beyond TCM. And I'm not against TCM. I think TCM does amazing things, and I learned a lot from TCM. But I think it's quite problematic when you think that TCM is the only thing that exists in China in the realm of healthcare, because that is simply false. And then you're ignoring like millions, literally millions, if not billions of people who are using these things every day.
Great. So, Elena, do you have any comments you like to complement?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I thank you for the great talk. My question was also about, so it seems like, so as you say, in China, people, despite the political situation that we all know about, people are actually using all of these various remedies. And so is it the case, so this is kind of a second question, is it the case that you're more talking to a Western audience who doesn't know this and who knows TCM from, you know, what they have been taught in TCM schools in China, because I do think that many Chinese people, as you say, do know and use regularly these practices.
Yeah, that's a very nice question, actually. And probably, as you know very well, in China, many of these things are very sensitive. When I was living in China and I wrote like my thesis in Chinese about the talismans and about talismanic healing, my supervisor at Fudan, Gao Xi, she told me that is fine if you do this for your master's because probably no one else is going to read it. But if you do it for your PhD, that's problematic and probably you can't, you have to change the subject. And when I went to the TCM, to the Shanghai University of TCM, and then I started talking, like just talking to my classmates about the talismans, they also told me that they knew or they were learning how to write talismans, or that like their grandparents or someone in their family knew how to write talismans and to use talismans. But that was not something taught in the university. And in the university, what they taught, this is superstition. This is something that should be eliminated from society, really eradicated from society. And so there is not, it's complicated to talk about the things in China, I found personally, perhaps because I was just a student. If I come like from a very top university from the West and then go back, perhaps people are going to listen to me, but as a student, they don't. And so here in the West, I found that people are far more open, and that's why I found so interesting in the Wellcome Trust, for example. For those of you who don't know the Wellcome Trust, so this is a charitable organization, and they fund a lot of research in biomedicine. And I was quite surprised that when they actually accepted my research on talismans. That was an old project, but about talismans. And so here I found people more open to all these. And if you go like to the Science Museum here in London, they have a huge gallery called the Medical Galleries, and you have all kinds of religious stuff together with, for example, X-ray machines and things about antibiotics, everything together. So they're really trying to show that healthcare is not simply dealing with disease, with illness, but it's a very broader understanding. So I found things are far easier here in Europe, at least in London than it was in China.
Great.
Yeah. Also they're welcome. Yeah, they're great doing this, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't even be able to be here if I was not for Wellcome.
Perfect. So if you have any other questions, Lena, feel free to discuss with us. Luis, I remember when I went to China, we had a SAR conference in 2014 in Beijing. And I was kind of surprised that the Chinese traditional Chinese medical schools were removing the traditional from their names. So they're calling themselves University of Chinese Medicine, Beijing University of Chinese Medicine, not traditional Chinese medicine. And I realized many of the universities took out the name of the traditional name. So what is your interpretation of this? Or have you noticed that this happened in China quite from several important universities?
I didn't know that, but I think this makes sense because, as I was saying before, so there was this project from the Chinese state. I don't know if they still like carrying on with this, but trying to identify and to give certificates to these folk healers. But the thing is that the folk healers, they don't want to show up because first they don't need the state recognition because they have been doing this for so long, and the state has never given recognition to them. Actually, it's the opposite. When they show up, like in society, what the state does is to crack down on them. And so perhaps that's a kind of movement. And we have to understand that TCM now is not only about China anymore, it's about like the whole world. As you see, like we have in Brazil, but we have in the States, we have in Europe, we have everywhere, like in Cuba, in Africa. And so probably that's really the way that the Chinese government wants to show Chinese medicine and Chinese healing, to show that what we are showing here, like this combination of some old practices with biomedicine, this is really what Chinese medicine is all about, and this is the future of all this. So I think this is really kind of political issue. Again, is this idea about unification and fragmentation. You have this ideal to unify things, like to unify medicine. A lot of things that can't really be unified, but the state wants to unify everything. And then on the other hand, like in society, you have all this fragmentation, people doing all sorts of stuff. And here I even haven't talked about, for example, Qigong, which is also a huge thing in China a few years ago. This practice is like martial arts for self-cultivation and improvement. That were extremely popular for quite a few decades. These were even supported by the Chinese state, but then later there was just a huge crackdown, and for years you couldn't even speak about Qigong in public anymore, otherwise could go to jail. And today they're trying to reinvent Qigong as a very different from the 1990s, as something like not simply scientific, but something that not so religious, that looked less religious. So it's really this thing about like religion again. Mm-hmm.
Great. So I have another question. If anyone else wants to come as a panelist or any other question, the chat is open. So Luis, I was very interested when you mentioned about the introduction of psychology in Chinese to the Chinese medicine. Mm-hmm. or to China. I mean, I'm not sure if the Chinese medicine, because usually learning traditional Chinese medicine, we don't see much as the like psychological part of it. You know, we know that we have this what is called inner like the emotions that will trigger some health problems, but they are not really addressed by any TCM interventions. Usually you prescribe herbs, you do acupuncture, but there is not like some talking or some cognitive or some verbal intervention. Mm-hmm. So what have you found about this?
So this is a whole discussion in the early 20th century, because that is really the idea when TCM was really taking shape. And so what the Chinese have to do, and there are some very interesting books about that, is they have to try to select things from the past, so like from these Chinese medical traditions that can somehow communicate with or like have a kind of dialogue with biomedicine. And then they also come up with the same question. Okay, so in the West, they have psychology. We don't have psychology in China. We have never had psychology in China because, again, the idea of psychology as something apart from medicine was not something that the Chinese could understand, because they're all integrated. And so what they started talking about, and this is something that not many people have discussed, and this is part of my PhD research right now. They try to understand this, what we today would call like Chinese rituals, as a form of psychology. So for example, the use of talismans, because when you do the talisman, I had actually another video, I think you can find this on the website also, and this is how to write the talisman. This is not simply how to write the same way you write a letter. This you have a whole, it's very ritualistic. And when you burn the talisman, it's not simply to burn it, you have the whole environment, you have the whole thing. And so what they said is that this works just like as hypnosis, or this kind of suggestion or hypnosis. And then they try to combine some ideas from psychology. And actually this thing that prayer is a form of psychology is not something simply Chinese. They were talking the same thing even here in London during the same time, and in Japan. So what I'm trying to show is that these ideas that the Chinese try to approach these folk traditions as forms of psychotherapy, it's something really transnational. The Chinese had their own content, like the talismans, for example, but here in the West, we had Christian prayer. You have, for example, this kind of pilgrimage to some certain churches. In Japan, you also have the same thing. So this was something that was going on everywhere. But at the end, it seems that those who are like really involved in shaping TCM didn't like the idea very much, and they just left it aside. But what is interesting is that over the past few years, when I was doing writing my master thesis on talismans, then I was also reading something about talismans today. And what I found quite surprising, that most of the articles on talismans are written not by historians in China, I mean like articles in Chinese. Then they're written not by historians, but by TCM doctors. And then they say the same thing. They say that talismans, you should explore talismans further because they actually work as a form of psychotherapy or psychology. And I don't know if things are going to change in the future, but there are still people there like who really believe that talismans and some other techniques are really like the real Chinese psychology or psychotherapy, and that this should be integrated into TCM. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. I see that a couple of colleagues from other important institutions, like we have here Sandro Graça from evidence-based acupuncture. If he like to share some thoughts about your talk, feel free to join us. Sandro, we have a couple SAR ambassadors. If you want to come here to ask some questions, we have here Stefan, we have Henry. So feel free to participate. And Stefan, okay. So yeah, I was thinking as people write here questions in the chat. I recently, Luis, recently a couple of years ago, I read a book. I was interested in here, like from our culture here is a very Catholic like culture here. There is a lot of Catholic rituals, and we see like many people like getting healed by some like religious intervention. And I read this book called The Cognitive Patterns of Jesus Christ, which was like very interesting. It was trying to relate like psychology with some Catholic religious intervention. And what they mentioned is something similar that you just mentioned. It's like the ritual. And they say that like Jesus never say, oh, you are cured. Like, I promote you healing. He always says, let your faith heals you. Like, so empowers, like kind of empowers the person to get in the healing state. And I think it's all, we've seen like in the medical field, what Carol Dweck from Stanford University called like mindset. Like you have the practitioner mindset, you have the patient mindset, and also I think all this practice, this folk, correct me if you don't think in this way, but this folk medicine or this folk practice kind of empowered both the people, the patient, and also the doctor, the health practitioner to get into a healing state, like to get better results on curing or doing the intervention or receiving the intervention. So that I think maybe a relation between, and I think also Ted Ketchuk have written some interesting articles talking about how rituals are important in like biomedicine in Navajo, the Indian cultures, and traditional Chinese medicine. They all have their own rituals that are part of the healing thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think this, because I also took part in some of these rituals, not only as an observer, but I really like a kind of participant, because I think they can make things more fun. You can have a better understanding, because it's really a bodily experience. And I totally agree with you, actually. These are very empowering, and for everyone, and everyone who takes, because that is not, you're not simply a kind of patient. You're not simply a subject. You're really part of a bigger thing. And that's really the idea, like that you're not alone. You're like the gods. Everyone is around you, surrounding you, living within you. And so it's something very empowering. And another thing that I was just remembering right now, that when you asked about TCM, how TCM doctors see these practices, like in China, for example, I remember another case, and this is the brother-in-law of my partner in Hong Kong. I'll just tell him like my brother-in-law, and he's from Hong Kong, and he is also a master, a talismanic master. So he uses talismans and can also be possessed by gods, but he doesn't do like the writing thing. He possessed and he starts speaking in languages, like speaking. The god is speaking through his mouth, basically. And then I was asking him about like medicine and all this, and then he told me that many people actually go to see him and they bring like antibiotics or any kind of like what you saw like these biomedical drugs for him to enhance the efficacy. So then he's going to do some rituals, and then the idea is that those biomedical drugs are going to be enhanced, and so going to become more powerful. And so again, you see like for the Chinese, at least for the not in an academic sense, like in the everyday life, for them, it doesn't really matter. Like if you're what we are doing, as long as it works, that is all. And I think that is for probably for most of us, like if you have a disease, you just want to get rid of that. You don't want like to see, oh, okay, is this scientific? Is this perhaps some people do, but like the most important thing is really to get healed. And then you're going to take part in everything that can get you healed. And that's one of the things that really keeps amazing me in China. And again, this is not from, I'm not talking about poor people, because sometimes, and that's some of the things that I used to hear in China, that people who do these kind of things, these are all poor, uneducated people. But in reality, that's false, because you see that even professors in university, they are doing this just because they're not going to tell you. But sometimes they do if you're very close to them, or because you see something. But they're not going to do kind of reach and going to post on Facebook, for example. Then you believe that they are very like scientific minded and all this. But that's not really, not always the case. Sometimes perhaps, but not always the case. And what is interesting, even people from the Chinese Communist Party, like this folk healer that I studied with in Shanghai, many of his clients are from the Communist Party. And so you can see even the communists who are like non-religious people, they are also going there like to be healed with talismans and to predict the future and all this kind of stuff. And so you see that it's really something very pervasive in Chinese society. And again, it's something very empowering. It's really about the self. But the self is also broader understanding, because you're not alone, you're part of a society. So everyone is really like together there.
Perfect. I see Sandra made a commentary here. Thanks, Sandra, for
there is a book, another book that is not about China, but about rituals and how rituals work and how rituals can heal people. This is a very very provocative argument. But if any of you are interested, I can also send Ali perhaps the reference, and you can just post this on the website. This actually is about anthropologists, and there is one chapter that I found particularly interesting. Is from Ecuador in South America, and this is a in vitro laboratory, and how they combine some Christian Catholic ideas with these in vitro it's not experiments, but like for the pregnancy and everything. And I found that quite interesting. It's really a broader understanding of healthcare. That's not simply to heal illness, but it's really like to heal the whole person, and not the person alone, but the whole like society.
Okay, perfect. And just to finish, we're getting to the end of our webinar. So people are having to sign out. Thanks everyone for attending here. Did you, in your research, did you come to any part that like acupuncture was being practiced to this folk healing, and then it was kind of dissociated to folks healing? Have you seen it in texts or images or any of your research mention like acupuncture being practiced and after removed from any of these folks healing?
So this happened quite a lot, but one thing that I remember very well is that this is some theories, but we also have some historical writings about this, is that in the very beginnings, acupuncture was not used to move the chi or anything like this. It was moved to kill the spirits living in the body. So that's why something very pointy. So you pierce the body to kill them. Uh, but of course, then, and this interpretation is one of the oldest, most probably, and is still out there in China today. We still have this kind of interpretation. It's just because in writing, even like in the Huangdi Neijing and all these medical texts, they don't talk about this either. They talk about the flow of qi or any kinds of things like flowing in the body, but not about these spirits. And so you see that even in China before TCM, you already have a kind of movement of these Chinese scholars trying to dissociate or trying to make acupuncture look more, I wouldn't call this rational, because what the folk healers are doing is also very rational and very logical, but trying to do something, trying to use another understanding to show that actually the real way that acupuncture works is by moving the chi, not by killing the spirits. But again, this is really up to the doctor, and some probably would say that this is nonsense. Just because we don't have their voice, you just have like you just know about those people who left writings for us, and these are very few.
Yeah.
Oh, there's someone who said that also use talismans.
Well, Liming, would you like to share something, Liming? If you want to share something here, become a panelist, just type here, we can promote you.
That's quite interesting. Actually, one of the, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Reiki or Heiki. Heiki, this Japanese technique of laying hands and everything, they also use talismans, and actually all the talismans, they come from China, because most of the Japanese medicine is kind of, they took from China, but they all reinvented. But Reiki, and Reiki also uses then some of these talismans, and again, it's to move the energy in the body. So they also give another explanation. They don't talk about spirits anymore. They talk about a kind of energy that's flowing in the body.
Okay, great. So, wow.
With the Taoist priest. Yeah, that's the thing, because the Taoists are still using these talismans. But again, in China, if you go to a temple and you ask a Taoist, can you give me a talisman for cold? This is illegal. You can't do that. Like you can ask, but if the Taoist gives you a talisman, he can go to jail or can be persecuted. And so they know very well, if they're going there and ask for something in public, they're not going to give you anything. If it's in private, then they can give you. And the same thing about the Buddhists, because usually associate talismans only with Taoism, but actually Buddhists are also using them. Everyone is using them, really. But again, it's not visible. And so you have to have a way of speaking to people and then asking them about these things. It's almost kind of, you have to be a kind of detective or something, doing really kind of investigation. Yeah, but the Reiki or Reiki is very very, very common use of talismans.
So I would like to invite everyone who wants to. We usually finish our webinars, Luis, with a group picture, like they do in China. When they do an event, like in the front of the hotel, not is in the front of the hotel of the speaking room, but the Zoom. So, Laura, if you can promote people that are still here with us as a panelist, it would be nice to take the group picture. And so, as we're getting to the end of our webinar, I'd like to thank Luis. Luis, thank you very much for sharing your research, your knowledge, your many visits to China. I think it was a very interesting part of the Chinese medicine that we haven't usually have time to discuss, or we don't have experts like you to get into this. And it was a very nice presentation. Thank you so much.
No, I should thank you. And again, if any of you are interested in any of the things that I have talked today, you can just email me. You can visit the website. I have quite a few pictures and videos and some articles as well if you like something more academic. Otherwise, you can just take a look at the pictures. And yeah, and I think it was really a pleasure. I'm very happy. And yeah.
Great. So today, just to finish, we had a patient that said that she could not do acupuncture because her priest said that it was like an evil thing. So he didn't want to do acupuncture. Andrea, who's here, our resident, was mentioning to us. So that's an interesting observation that we had today in clinic.
Yeah, that's when acupuncture comes to the West, and especially like places like Brazil, where we have a very strong like religious sense. Yeah, I mean, religious, not going to church necessarily, but a kind of spiritual thing. Then you have this very interesting ways of how things change. And I didn't know this about the priest, but it makes sense, I think, in the Brazilian context.
Okay, so I'll take the group picture. So 1, 2, 3, smile. One more, 1, 2, 3. All right, so thank you everyone.
Great, and thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, and I hope you see you in June on our SAR conference, and we keep in contact. We have our social media. We also have our new Instagram with Sandro. Thank you, Sandro, for helping us to promoting our Instagram and our conference. And I hope to see you on our next webinar. So
thank you.
Sorry.